Hey everybody, and welcome to the Big Bass Podcast, the fishing show where size matters. My name is Ken Duke.
And I'm Terry Battisti. Our producer and engineer is Nathan Benson. Before we kick off this episode of the Big Bass Podcast, we'd like to ask you a favor. If you're coming back to the show because you enjoyed previous episodes, or if you're a first-time listener, please click the subscribe button and the notification bell now. By subscribing and hitting the bell, you'll be notified of each new post, and you'll really help us to build this channel into something more special than it's becoming. We also hope that you check out the website, thebigbasspodcast.com. There you'll find all of our shows, special bonus material, our exclusive Big Bass Podcast calculator, and lists of all the state and world record bass. So Ken, let's get started with this week's episode.
Fantastic, Terry. This episode of the Big Bass Podcast is all about the biggest bass ever caught in fishing's most legendary tournament, the Bassmaster Classic. There is no bigger or brighter stage in the world of competitive fishing than the Classic, and there's no cooler moment than bringing a giant bass across that stage. Our guest had that experience on February 24th, 2006, when he made one of the greatest catches not only in bass tournament history, but also in big bass history. Before we talk with him, maybe you could give us a quick recap of part one of this series where we counted down to this fish, the biggest ever caught in the Bassmaster Classic.
Yeah, so for 30 years, Ricky Green's 8-pound, 9-ounce bass that he caught from Lake Gunnersville stood as the biggest bass in Classic history. And then in 2006, Bass held the Classic at Florida's Kissimmee Chain of lakes. It was the second Classic in Central Florida and the first in late winter. Perfect storm for big fish. Just about everyone covering the tournament expected fireworks, and on day one, it did not disappoint at all. 5 bass were brought to the scales that exceeded the weight of Green's fish on the first day alone. Mark Tucker was the first to weigh in a new Classic record with a 912, followed by Edwin Evers, who had an 815, and then perennial Classic winner Rick Clunn pushed to the top of the mark into the double digits with a 1010. But our guest had not one, but 2 beasts that broke the previous record, including the big fish, an 1110, that still stands today as the biggest bass ever weighed in Classic history, and possibly will remain it for many more years to come. So,
hey, Terry, let's bring him on. Preston Clark, welcome to the Big Bass Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, Preston.
Thank you, guys. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
All right, Preston, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump the gun here a little bit, and I'm going to make a bold statement. Ricky Green's record lasted 30 years. I think your record will last longer than that.
There's a possibility of it. I kind of hope that someone does break it, because I know what it can do for their career, especially if it's a newcomer. I hope that when it's broken, that it's somebody that was like me in the same shoes that I was in, just starting, getting out on the scene and make a name for them, be able to get sponsorship and get all they can get out of such a record.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're such a gracious person, Preston. Let's set the stage. You talk about you hoping a newcomer gets it because of what it can do for his career. Let's set the stage, because that's kind of exactly where you were. You're a North Florida guy living in Palatka, growing up fishing around the St. Johns and so forth. In 2004, you qualified for the old top 150s, the Bassmaster Tour through the Southern Opens. And you did really well. You finished 15th in those 2005 AOY rankings, and you qualified for your first Classic. You went to Pittsburgh, which I still think was one of the coolest Classics.
And for what?
Well, it was really well attended. I think Preston will agree with me. It was a very enthusiastic crowd. The fishing sucked like never before.
Right.
But Preston did really well. You know, he finished 15th. He had a 3-day total of 7 bass, weighing 7 pounds, 1 ounce. And Preston, did you ever imagine that on the first day of the next Classic, you'd have 2 bass bigger than everything you caught at Pittsburgh?
It was certainly a fun tournament. That was an easy tournament to win. All you had to do was figure out just a little bit, and I should have won it. I should have won both of them. I figured out something in Pittsburgh within the last half an hour.
Ah,
Had I started on day one, I would have blown the field away. And it's something that I knew. I grew up fishing that way, and I went to it with about a half an hour to go. The light bulb went off, and I missed a couple nice smallmouth. A 2-pound smallmouth was a big fish up there.
Oh yeah.
I had a couple of them on, then I
was.
caught a couple, and it was I felt like it would have been my tournament to win if I'd have just figured out just a little bit earlier.
Yeah, for folks who don't remember that classic very well, I remember it like yesterday. There were 2 days of that classic, guys, where if you had a 2-pounder, that was big fish of the day. That would have been big fish on, I think, day 1 and day 3, a 2-pound even fish. So, yeah, Preston can talk about those fish must have looked huge to you.
Oh yeah,
at that derby.
It was a good time. I'd never been in that part of the country before. I had a great time. The people were great. The fans were out of this world. It was packed out. The Mellon Arena was sold out. There was standing room only, and it was exciting. It was my first classic I'd ever attended, and I was in it. And it was real cool.
So can you talk about what you figured out in the last 30 minutes?
Train trussels. I grew up by a train trestle on the St. Johns River, and I knew that anytime you hear the train coming, you hear the train whistle coming, you ran to the train trestle because the vibration would cause all the stuff, the crustaceans and the minnows and stuff, to get out of their hiding places. They would run out, and the fish would feed for 4 or 5 minutes. And I came, and there was train trussels everywhere in Pittsburgh. There must have been 15 of them. And I ran to one and threw a crankbait around it as the train was going across. And I missed one about 2.5 pounds that come up and come off. And I went to my next one, and I caught one. And I went to my next one. I think I caught a short. And I went to the next one and caught another one and lost another one. But yeah, another hour, and I could have had a 10-pound limit.
Wow.
In just that one day.
A 10-pound limit would have blown it out. Yeah, 12-15 wins the whole derby for 3 days.
Right.
12-15.
Yeah.
Well, but Aaron was fishing bridges, but
so was Van Dam. So was Van Dam.
I was on that bridge as well the first day. I caught my limit early, and then I went to the bridge. I'd had fish on that bridge, and it was covered up. There were several guys on that yellow bridge, but yeah, they were the only two that could really catch them off of it. They showed why they're the best at finesse.
You were right there, man. And that 15th place finish, it was kind of a weird transition period. Bass was going from the summertime classics, which had been that way for more than 20 years, and then switching over to the late winter classics. And so you kind of qualified just by virtue of your great success in that classic. So 2006, the classic's coming to Florida. It's coming to the Kissimmee Chain. And Preston Clark, after that last 30 minutes in Pittsburgh, you had to be so excited to hear that.
I was nervous. I knew that the expectations were for me to do well because I was from Florida, but I'd only fished the Kissimmee Chain maybe a half a dozen times in my life. I didn't know it that well, and just got I did what I grew up doing, looking for bedding fish, and I found a couple areas that were just stacked. If the tournament, a lot of people don't realize that in Classic and during the Bassmaster Classic, you only get a half a day of practice 2 days before the tournament. And if the tournament would have been the day of the practice, I would have had, I had a 30-pound bag, but I think I could have had more than that on that practice day.
Wow.
So now day one. You talk about if it had started a little bit earlier, and of course, folks don't realize you got to get off the water early on Wednesday. The classic starts on Friday. Thursday is media day, so you're stuck talking to guys like me, which is not a good time when you want to go fishing. But that day,
not when you have a giant sitting out there that is waiting on you.
Well, yeah, you got and that's
and
not
you're
even the
hoping
big
and
fish.
praying that no one goes out and poaches it on you.
and Terry, that's not even the best fish he caught that day. But we'll get to that in just a minute. I want to set the stage a little bit for what happened on day one of that classic, because there were 51 anglers in the field and 49 guys limited. That's how good it was. Joel St. Germain only caught a couple of fish. He was a Bass Nation qualifier out of Rhode Island, and Mike Iaconelli got DQ'd for destroying some equipment. We all remember that flag controversy and incident. But the average catch that day was over 14 pounds. The average bass was almost 3 pounds, which is fantastic for a tournament at any time. Preston, of course. Yeah, especially the classic where there's a lot of pressure on. It's a tough. It takes you out of your routine. Instead of guys getting to go with their routine and their preparation and so forth, they hurry over here and they wait, and they hurry over there and they wait, and then they do these interviews, and they do this TV, and it's got to be a hassle. Preston shows up on day one. He's got 5 bass weighing 29 pounds and an ounce. It is the second best catch in the 5 bass limit era of the Classic. Ironically, the best catch to that point came in that same day. Luke Clausen came in with 5 ounces more. But Preston, your catch was far more impressive to me, and I think most of the fans, because you had 2 giants, a 9 and an 11-10. And as I recall, that 9 came awfully early. Is that the one you had found in practice?
That's the one I found in practice. I'd found. I knew she was a good fish. I didn't know she was that big, but I found her in practice, and I put a marker on her. And the way that I mark a lot of down here, a lot of times we mark beds with tomato stakes, and we'll back off. And I like to back off far enough where I can't see the fish. I can just see my tomato stake and know where the bed's at. But in this instance, I marked it with a piece of clothes hanger and a white piece of foam that I suspended just under the water, so no one else could see it. Because people they know when you mark them with the tomato stakes, they'll go along and just look for tomato stakes. But if they can't see that piece of foam under the water, and you can see it early in the morning when the visibility is low. You can see it if you got an idea where it's at. You can spot it and know where in relation your bed's at to your marker. But I pulled up there and I pitched in first or second pitch, and I caught the buck. And I couldn't see the fish; it was still dark. And I said, "Well, I wonder if she's still there." And I pitched back in the next pitch, and I saw my marker lay over where she turned. And and later I said, "Oh, she's still there." And the next pitch, she hit it, and I put her in the boat. So I had two fish within the first 4 or 5 pitches.
What did the male weigh?
Maybe 1.5 pounds.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Did the male make it to the scales, or did it wind up being culled?
I think I culled that one out.
So now I'm fascinated by the tomato stakes or the clothes hanger or whatever you were doing to mark it. Did you always put it a certain distance? Did you always put it 3 feet, 5 feet to one side? How do you do that?
I always put my marker on the shallow side where when the fish hits, and sometimes the shallow side might be on the lake side and the deep side be on the shore side. But when they pick your bait up, I don't want them to run into my marker with me trying to set the hook and then have to deal with that as well. Yeah. So
That's smart.
When they hit, they'll always go towards the deeper water when they move the bait up the bed.
That's next level stuff, Preston Clark. Thank you. That's a fabulous tip.
So I want to ask you about the hanger. So you just take a wire clothes hanger and undo it, and then stick a piece of styrofoam on it, so it'll be just below the surface, and then you stick it in the surface.
Take a big, maybe 4 or 5 ounce egg sinker that you use for saltwater fishing, run it through your clothes hanger, bend it over, and drop it. Right next to the bed.
Terry, don't do these things because I'll be doing these things now.
You take another clothes hanger, you straighten it out and leave the hook on it. And at the end of the day, you go by and just hook it and put it back in your boat and reuse it.
That's brilliant.
That is so smart. I like that. Tell us a little bit about the area. You said you'd only been out to the Kissimmee Chain a handful of times in the past. Was this an area where you had found some better bedding fish in the past, or were you just finding all these fish in practice?
It was a traditional area where they bed year in and year out, just like when Rojas caught them so well down there a few years before. That was a traditional area as well. And I went in and I started looking, and it was the hydrilla was thick, and when it got close to shore, when it got maybe 50 yards from shore, you could see the bottom from on the outside edge, and it looked like it was really, really shallow. But once you got up there, it was a wall, and there was like 3 foot of water there, and they were bedding on the back side of this wall. You couldn't see them unless you got way back, behind the line of hydrilla.
Well, if I ask a question that's too much, you just say no comment. But was this on the on Big Toho or what lake was this?
It was on Toho. It was in Goblet's Cove, right in the mouth of Goblet's Cove.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Now, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There were some docks there. It's right where there's a string of docks. It's right before you get into the docks. I found several fish around the docks, between the docks, but it was right in the mouth of Goblet's Cove.
Tell us about the gear, Preston, and also tell us maybe how your gear choices have changed through the years, because that's been going on 17 years ago.
Right.
Yeah, it seemed like my stuff was antique now that I was fishing with. I was sponsored by Eris Rods at the time, and they had a good rod. Especially with a 711 flipping stick. I was throwing 20-pound Berkeley Trilene big game, just a standard issue, 5/0 owner hook and a 3/16 sinker. I did have a tungsten sinker. I was using penetrator weights at the time, and pegging everything with a toothpick. That was before they came out with a peg. So I'd put a toothpick in it, break it off, and then slide your line up, tie your hook above where you pegged it. That's what I was fishing with, and I had those big old green Shimano Corrado reels, and they were, you couldn't break one of them. But that was my setup.
Yep.
Oh, those green Corrados, they're bulletproof. I still got one that I pull out once in a while. So now, what was it? I think it was a Zoom Critter Craw. Was that the bait, green pumpkin or something?
Yeah, they quit making that. I was fishing with a Zoom Critter Craw, and they quit making it, and I couldn't understand why. And later on in my career, I was lucky enough to get with Bass Assassin and help them come out along with a craw that's very similar, called a Whoopah craw, and that's my bedding go-to bait now.
Oh, very cool. Now, a lot of guys, especially in the dark water, the tannin-stained water that we have here in Florida, like a more visible bait, maybe a white bait in that situation. But you're going with a very natural color there. Why the natural color versus something you can see?
Well, I'm so far away from the bed that I can't see my bait anyhow.
Gotcha.
A lot of guys use those white baits so they can see when the fish picks it up and moves it off, because the bite is definitely a different bite. It's so light you can't feel the bite sometimes. You can just see your line drop or see it move just a little bit. But I'm so far enough away from the bed that white doesn't have any advantage for me. I'm far enough where it's all feel. It's every bit of it's feel. You can feel it when it comes off the blade of grass. You can feel it when it's in the bed, and it's a lot of concentration.
If I recall correctly, you had a media guy in the boat with you that day. You had our friend Vance McCullough in the boat. And I think Vance took the best classic photos maybe that I've ever seen of you. You must have said to Vance, "I've got a big one set up over here. Get behind me, and you're going to have a picture of me breaking Ricky Green's heart." Because if I recall correctly, and I haven't seen the photo in a while, unfortunately, but you're down on your knees on the front deck.
I was on my knees. That was very cool. That's one of my favorite pictures as well. I was looking, and I was showing him my marker from the 9-pounder that morning. We come back around, and I'd picked it up, and I just happened to look up, and there she was, about 30, 40 feet in front of the boat, just looking right at me, pointed right at me. See how wide she was. It was, and I was like, "Oh, wait a minute, there's a good one." And I said, "Sit down, be quiet."
So you found that fish that day?
Yeah, I found that big one that day.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
So you catch the 9 about 4 casts into the day. What time is it that you spot the 11:10?
probably around 11 o'clock.
Okay.
Okay.
A few hours in.
I catch the buck first, and he's barely a pound. And I release him, and when I released him, a lot of times the buck will go right back to the bed, and the female won't bite. And I was hoping that I already had a limit. I couldn't put him in the live well, so I put him back in the water, and I got back in the bed before he could get back to it, and she hit it the very next cast. And that was a cool picture on the hook set of that fish. I'll have to send it to you, Ken.
Oh, well, for anybody, we'll try to get the picture and put it on the show.
Okay.
I'll reach out to Vance and see if he's willing to share that with us. It is the most amazing classic picture I've ever seen. For anybody who hasn't seen it, there is a wake as this fish turns on this bait or something. There is a wake that looks like it might shake the whole boat. It's that big and powerful. It's the most dramatic picture I think I've seen. It's much cooler even than a giant fish splashing and about to be landed, because you know what's about to happen. It occurs to me, Preston, that this is 2006. This is kind of pre-Power Pull, pre-shallow water anchor. What were you doing to hold your boat in position for these presentations?
2 small bell anchors that I had on short ropes, and that's another thing you want to do back when we were doing that before Power Poles came along. You want to give yourself every advantage you can, control everything you can control, so you don't anchor your boat on the side that you're going to pull your fish up to when you try and land him. You make sure your anchor's on the other side, that your stake is on the right side of the bed. Give yourself every advantage you can.
So when you and I talked back when we did the article for Bass West 2006, 2007, you were telling me about a pole that you used that you would drive down and then you would tie it off on your boat cleat. What, can you go into that?
That was my push pole. I'd push it down in the mud and tie it off. Now they have stakes that people make that are fiberglass poles. Of course, now you got power poles. That changed everything.
Right.
It's such an awesome tool to have on your boat, and I'll never have another boat without them.
Now, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place here, Preston. Because this would be such an easy interview, Preston, if you had just caught only one giant, but you got to catch 2, and so I don't want to disregard the 9, even though the other fish kind of almost dwarfs the 9. When you catch the 9, did you weigh this fish before you put it in the live well, or do you just say, I know this one's going to the scales, I put it in the well?
Yep, I've never weighed my fish. I've always put them in. I know which one's the smallest one. I have a balance beam, and if I catch one bigger, I'll find out what they weigh when I get in.
Did you know what the record was? Did you know Ricky Green had the record at that point?
I wasn't sure what the record was, but you catch an 11-pounder, you're pretty chances are good that you're going to be.
Oh yeah, well, the 11 left no doubt, but the 9 was kind of close. You were only 7 ounces bigger than Green's fish from 30 years earlier. And then a few hours later, you remove all doubt. You remove absolutely every bit of doubt, which was phenomenal. Take us through the 11. So you spot the 11 on the bed. You're probably so good at you probably have calibrated eyes, Preston Clark. When you're looking at that fish, did you have a feel for how much that fish weighed?
When I spotted her, as soon as I spotted her, I knew it was a big fish. I dropped down to my knees to where she couldn't see me, and I couldn't see her anymore. So I looked at her. She was looking right at me. She looked like she was 8 inches across the back. I mean, she was wide.
Wow.
And I got down as quick because I didn't want to spook her and get her off the bed. I didn't want her to know I was there. And so I didn't really get a good look at her until I put my hand on her and got her in the boat. And the whole time, the whole classic experience, at both classics, I was never nervous, ever. And I wasn't nervous when I was fighting the fish and I got her in the boat. But after I got her in the boat, I've been catching big fish my whole life. But after I got that one in the boat, then it hit me that, hey, this is a pretty big deal I'm in right now. And I'm catching them pretty good.
I've seen you happy. I've seen you, excited, but I've never seen you where I thought you were anxious or anything like that. You're a very cool, collected guy. In your tournament career, was that the most excited you've ever been, or the most you were feeling it that day?
Repeat that one more time. I broke up.
I'm sorry. I was just saying you're just you're a very composed and professional guy. I've seen you smile, I've seen you happy, but I've never seen you where I thought you were nervous. Was that the closest you ever got to nervous in your tournament career?
Yes, I had to sit down and drink some Gatorade and just relax for.
So you're saying,
Were you shaking?
Well, that's two bass that are way over 20. So let's see what have I got to do from here.
Career.
Exactly.
I knew what this meant, and I was really. I wasn't thinking so much about myself as I was about I can't wait till my wife and my dad see me, up on stage with the fish. And that's what I was really excited about.
Amazing. And so the 1110 goes into the well, and you're also not weighing that fish. You're just, and then, but let's talk about the other three. I don't want to make too big a deal about the other three, but you've got over 20 pounds in two fish, and you come to the scales at the end of the day with 29.1. So the other three fish you have are nothing particularly special. Were you trying to save some of your better fish, or did you think, or were you still trying to knock it out of the park with every fish that day? We may have lost Preston. There he is.
I'm back.
Oh, I don't know if you heard the question, Preston.
Okay, what was it?
Oh, I was asking, you had those two massive fish.
Right.
At that point, they are the two biggest bass ever caught in the Bassmaster Classic. And then, but your other three fish were not giants. They were, they averaged about 3 pounds apiece. Did you deliberately ratchet back and said, I've got to save some fish in this area for the rest of this derby? Or were you still going out looking for giants?
Now they were leaving the fish. There were way more fish in practice than there were the first day of the tournament, and they were leaving. So I was catching what I could catch, and the next day I was just hoping that I could go out and catch a 10 or 12 pound bag the next day, because those fish, that style of fishing was about over with. We had a terrible cold front come through on the final day that just completely ruined the style of fishing I was doing.
It ruined things for a lot of people. I mean, on day one, you've got over 29 pounds. On day two, everybody's catches dropped. You wound up with a limit that weighed just over 10 pounds. You had a 2-day total over 39, but you fell 2 spots to 4th place. And at this point, you're trailing Luke Clausen by a little over 5 pounds. You're still well within striking range, especially if you can duplicate anything like you did on day one. But then day three was as you said, your pattern kind of fell apart on you. The way you were catching them fell apart on you. Take us through day three.
Day three, I decided to go down south to where everybody else was at and just start flipping. I had no idea that they were catching them in the pads. I didn't know how they were catching them, but I knew what I thought I would do. Growing up in Florida, I would go flip mats because they'd be under for the heat, and I flipped and didn't have any bites. And then finally I had one on that got off, and I was frustrated. And the weather was terrible. It was nasty. And I started back in, and I said, I got maybe an hour or so to go. And I came back in through the locks in Toho, and I went into a local canal. And it was deep, maybe 6, 7, 8 foot deep. And chatterbaits had just come out. And I had grabbed one. My buddy Brian Thrift had given me some when he made them famous, and they just come out. And I had very little confidence in them, but I tied one on, and I started throwing down the middle of this canal, and made 4 or 5 casts, and I catch a 5-pounder. I'm like, wow! And I make about 3 or 4 more casts. I have one about 7 come up and come off next to the boat.
Oh,
5 casts later, I have one about 6 come off next to the boat. And it was time to go. The game over. So I weighed in 1 fish on that final day.
Yeah, and as you say, it weighed 5 pounds and an ounce. You had for 3 days, you had 44 pounds 4 ounces. You ended up in sixth place, about 12 pounds behind the winner, but really just one good fish out of third place. And if you'd have had a limit, especially with the kind of quality that you had on, you'd have easily won that tournament. How much do you think about that? How close you came to winning that classic?
Yeah, I think about both of them, that one and Pittsburgh. Like I mentioned earlier, I should have won both of them. And, but the Elite Series is so competitive. Those guys are so good from top to bottom of the field that there's a lot of tournaments that you go, I should have won this tournament if I'd have had another 30 minutes. And they go, well, what place you come in? Well, I came in 38th. But it was that, and there was, in every tournament, there's stories like that. Somebody out there has found them the last few minutes of the day and just didn't have enough time to put them in the boat.
I mean, if you landed the 6 and the 7, that's 13 pounds, and you only missed it by 12. I mean,
yeah,
you put those two fish in the boat, and you're a
it's
classic
a different
winner.
story. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Dang.
Could have been.
For so many guys will beat themselves up for a long time about when a tournament kind of gets away from them. And some guys are really good about, maybe beating themselves up until they get to the next derby. Where do you land in that spectrum? Do you put it behind you pretty quickly, or does it nag at you for a long time?
I put it behind me about maybe a couple months, about 2 months later. I put all the classics behind. When we went to Santee Cooper, I forgot all about the classics.
and that's
Yeah.
hey folks, for my
Another
money,
story.
that's another fabulous Preston Clark story about big fish, because in that inaugural season of the Elite Series of 2006, the Santee Cooper Showdown, just a couple months later, in March and early April of 2006, Preston goes out and he wins this 4-day derby and sets a 5 bass limit record with 115 pounds 15 ounces. Then the record. Nobody had ever really approached that. I think you beat Rojas's 108.
Beat Rojas.
So you
7 pounds.
whooped him by better than 7 pounds there, and you had 30, almost 40 pounds on day one, which at the time was the third best single day total. Now it ranks 8th, so it's still top 10. Where does that rank? You got so many great claims to fame, Preston, in a relatively short pro career. Where does Santee Cooper rank for you?
That's the highlight of my career for me.
Is that right?
That was such a special week, and my family was there to enjoy it with me. And I had no idea. I had a terrible practice. I had no idea I was going to catch them that well, and it just happened. They were there, and I knew what to do, and it was just, I had fun for 4 days. I had a blast.
Can you go a little bit deeper into how you caught those fish and what put you on them?
I was sight fishing for them, and I had gone into an area the first day of practice, and there were like these little inland ponds or something. I don't know if they might have been rice fields back in the day or what, but there was this little I don't know, that you could go from one to the other by the little paths or whatnot. And then they'd open up, and they'd be maybe 5, 6, 7 acres in each one of these ponds. There was maybe a dozen of them, and it was over in Utah Creek area. And I'd gone through them, and I'd seen some beds, some old beds and stuff, and but there weren't any fish on them. And then the last day of practice, I stumbled across a couple fish on a bed. There were a couple 5 or 6 pounders. I said, well, there's one set of fish on beds. There's going to be more somewhere. Let me go back in there and look. And as I was going back in, I was going down this little path, a little ditch. And as I was going in, I looked in front of my boat, and I saw a couple swimming that were going in. And I started really looking ahead of the boat, and I saw 5 or 6 more good ones that were swimming in. And once I got in there, there was 150, 200 beds, and every one of them had a 2-pound buck on them. And the girls were starting to come in. I sat there at the entrance and just sat there and was still Yeah, and they just started coming in. They were 7 and 8 pounders coming in. I was like, oh my goodness! And uh, so I marked 3 of them. And the next morning, I went into my first cast. I caught one 9.2. My second
Oh,
my second cast of the day, I caught one 8.15. And my third cast of the day, I caught a 6 even. And so
oh
my first
man.
3 casts, I had a bunch of fish. Peter T was in there with me. But we decided that this is your side, this is my side, and we worked well together. And I'd known Pete my whole life, so uh, we worked well together. And after the second day, when you know he realized that something special was happening, he abandoned ship. He left and gave me the rest of the area.
Wow.
Wow,
Awesome.
that is a gentlemanly and professional thing to do. Kudos to Peter
Sportsmanship.
T. That had to pain him though to leave fish like that.
Yeah, he there were there was a lot of fish. There was a lot of fish around. He could go the next one over and probably do just as well.
Well, there's a couple of guys from the upper end of the St. Johns River finding the same fish in practice. What was it maybe about each of your upbringing and education in the sport on the upper St. Johns that took you both to that spot?
The growing up in northern Florida is unique from growing up anywhere else. Being that our spawning season, we get we get 6 months out of the year to do this.
Wow.
They'll spawn. That sometimes they start spawning in November, December, and they'll spawn always sometimes through June. Just depending on the weather. So it's a technique that we got good at. You
Yeah.
know, and we get to do it so often. It's not like up north where they might get 2 moon phases and it's over. For smallmouth or for largemouth, if they're not on the first moon phase, they're on the next one, and then there's no more spawning activity. Well, down here, that they don't all spawn at one time. They come in wave after wave after wave, and it's just a technique that we got to practice on, and we're good at because we've done it so much.
So do the big fish spawn before the smaller fish, or is it just a mix of sizes spawning on all these moon phases?
Usually, the first wave is the biggest fish.
Okay.
Usually,
So
the
that's
first.
in November, December time frame, possibly,
Yeah,
right?
December, January. It depends on the weather. If it's been a cold winter, then they'll hold off until January, February. But if it's a warm winter, yeah, we can start catching them in Okeechobee in November.
Here in Central Florida, I've seen a lot of fish on the bed around Thanksgiving. Every year, I'll find a few. Preston, is that your favorite time to go after big fish when you're sight fishing?
Yeah, I don't sight fish as much as I used to anymore. I like to go fishing, and I've been very fortunate and been able to catch big fish at a bunch of different techniques. My biggest personal stringer was caught with a crankbait.
Is that right?
Wow.
Yeah.
How big was that?
I had 5 that went 52.
Oh my
Jeez. What
gosh!
crankbait?
It was a Bomber 7A and Fire Tiger, and I caught him.
Wow.
I caught him in golly in probably about 10 minutes. It was just one after another.
Holy.
Wow, was this on the St. John's?
It was on the St. John's.
Now the St. John's is so different,
Wow.
and folks maybe outside the state of Florida will have a hard time appreciating this because everybody thinks of Florida as this one hodgepodge, and every body of water is a salad bowl. But that's not exactly true. There's a big change in the kind of vegetation you get if you're talking Okeechobee versus if you're talking the Kissimmee Chain or the Harris Chain or up where Preston lives on the upper St. Johns River. And the guys in the St. Johns, Preston, it seems to me, are a whole lot better at offshore fishing than the rest of us in the state. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, it is. There's a lot of offshore stuff on the St. John's. A lot of shell bars, living shell, a lot of shell bars, a lot of drop offs. But you also have a mix well, we used to have a mix of grass, eelgrass, and cattails, buggy whips, tules, things like that. But all those are gone. All we have now is lily pads on the shoreline, and that was caused by the hurricanes we had a couple of years ago. The water level got so high the light, and so dark that the light just couldn't penetrate through the water, and all the grass died, all the vegetation died that hasn't come back.
You look at the guys who have been successful all around the country, and unfortunately, very few have come from the state of Florida. The only guy who's ever won an Angler of the Year title on the national level is Scott Martin, who of course grew up on Okeechobee and the son of Roland Martin. But it's always blown me away that the guys in Florida have struggled in a lot of other places. But Preston, you did well a lot of other places. Bernie Schultz does really well in New York, for example. You won on Santee Cooper.
Bobby Lane.
Bobby Lane is one on Kentucky Lake. Chris Lane did the most outrageous thing. He won on St. Clair, which I still can't believe. But what is it about Florida that so many pros find limiting when they go outside the state?
There's only, there's no deep water fishing in Florida. Everything's shallow. So whenever you do get the opportunity to go and fish, Kentucky Lake, or you go fish for smallmouth up north, you learn as you go. It's a learning experience as you go. You kind of wing it, or I did. I kind of winged it until I kind of figured it out. And once you figure it out, then you're all right. But the guys in Florida, I think, have an advantage of it's such a tough fishery in Florida. It's easier to catch fish when you leave Florida. Florida's the hardest place there is to catch them, and I attribute that to we get more fishing pressure. We're not iced over 6 months out of the year. There's people down here fishing, every single day of the year. They get pressure. So if you can catch them here, you can catch them somewhere else.
Well, but the other thing is that Florida fish seem to be really temperamental with respect to weather change. You got a cold front, the water or the air temperature drops 10 degrees, and those fish just shut down. Is there truth? Yeah. So, you take someone out of the upper tier states, or North Carolina, Tennessee, and they go down there and they just don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah, I'll give you guys a weird stat. There have been a couple of dozen Elite Series tournaments in the state of Florida over the last 18 years, since Elite started in 2006. Only 2 anglers in all those Elite tournaments caught a 20-pound bag all 4 days of a tournament. 2 guys. Neither of them won, by the way. Ish Monroe cracked 100 pounds one time at Okeechobee. He didn't have 20 pounds every day. It's just so hard to be consistent here. And I'm always blown away by that. Even a guy of the caliber of Preston Clark, whacking him on day 1 at the 2006 Classic, looking unstoppable, has a day where he's got 5 pounds. And that's very humbling, isn't it, Preston? I mean,
they don't seem to replenish like they do in the northern lakes. In the northern lakes, overnight, more fish will come in. And it seems like once you catch what you catch in Florida, you need to move on to another spot. They doesn't keep reloading like traditional other lakes do up further north.
Preston, I'd like to talk to you about your philosophy of targeting big fish in competition, because you have been wildly successful with that, and especially at the highest level. When you're targeting a big fish in competition, do you specifically go after big fish like during a sight fishing tournament, or do you kind of let the big fish come to you by cycling through a lot of numbers of fish?
I usually go after just a big fish, not a numbers. Once I have a limit, I put on baits that big fish will eat. A bigger worm. I like 11-inch. I throw an 11-inch bass assassin worm a lot. As I know if something hits it, he's going to be something I can put him in a live well and
call with.
Yeah, I can call with him. But and I throw a jig a lot. I throw even in Florida. Yeah, I flip a jig a lot. But I target. You don't have to have 50 bites. You just need the 5 right ones. So once I have in the boat, then I put on bigger baits and target bigger fish.
All right, I'm gonna see. I don't have to take notes, Preston, because I'm gonna go back and listen to this later. What's your go-to Florida jig? Keep in mind that whatever you say on the show, I'm going to be putting it to use as quickly as possible.
I use the Metlock double weed
The
guard
double.
jig. That's the one to use if you're. That's the one that I've always used, and it's a good quality product with a good hook. And I put the Whoopall crawl that we talked about earlier from Bass Assassin on the back of it, and that's what I flip with.
Now, for folks who are not familiar with that, it does have a double weed guard. It's usually comes in some of the heavier sizes. I would say the go-to size for most anglers is between 3/4 and maybe 1.25 ounces. And what is it about that particular jig, Preston, that makes it special?
Where the line tie is, you have a good hookup ratio. With the double weed guard, it doesn't you don't get hung up near as much as you do with a single. The single weed guard, the weed guard is like this, and the hook is underneath it, and the way you get in something is when the weed guard moves over and the hook gets in it. Well, with a double weed guard, it's never gonna go past one of the weed guards, so it
Gotcha.
doesn't get hung up hardly at all.
I know, of course, Joe Medlock makes that jig down in South Florida, and I know down in South Florida where they got a lot of sawgrass and stuff like that, and hay, what they'll call hay down there. He drags that jig a lot. He'll even reel it slowly. Do you hop it? Do you drag it? How do you mostly fish it here in Florida?
I hop mine. I flip it in pads a lot, and I hop it. I won a BFL on it a few years back in the Kissimmee Chain. And it was all hopping the, you flip it in the pads, and the pads, a field of pads, you have to really dissect them. It's just not a bunch of pads. It's actually individual plants with maybe 4 or 5 stems coming out of each one. And you try and make sure that your bait lands at the base of those stems where they all come together, because that's where the fish is going to be.
What's your go-to jig weight for that technique?
Most times 3/4.
And are you flipping with braid or
Yeah,
what do you
65 pound braid. Been flipping with a new rod, relatively new rod that I really fell in love with the last year or so. It's made by a local man down here called Reaper Rods.
Reaper rods?
Reaper Rods, yeah, they're really good rod. I've got 4 or 5 of them now, and they're not a sponsor of mine, but I like their product.
Are you still working with a lot of companies in the industry?
It's a few, yeah. I still work with Stick Jacket. I still work with Bass Assassin. Still work with PrePower Pull. Whenever they need me, I'm there for them. They certainly have helped me out tremendously.
We'll put some links down below the video when this story goes up, and we'll hopefully send a few folks to the folks who are still working with you, because hey man, you're one of my favorite guys who's ever fished the trail, and anybody who's working with Preston Clark is a friend of ours. Bedding fish, Preston, even though you catch them a lot of different ways, and your best bag ever was on that bomber crankbait, I'm fascinated with bedding fish, and my question that I love to ask the guys who are really good at it is, how do you know when to give up on a fish?
You can tell by after you throw them 4 or 5 times and 6 times, and you want to stand up and take a peek at them. You can tell if they leave the bed and it takes them a while to come back, and when you throw up next cast, they leave again, and they're real skittish. That's a hard fish to catch. When you throw on a bed and they start turning on it right off the bat, it shouldn't take just a few casts. You can catch that one. Sometimes I won't spend more than maybe 20, 25 minutes on a fish. If it's a good fish, if it's a little fish, I'm moving on because there's a big one somewhere around.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm going ahead and leaving him alone. But if it's a good fish, one that I really need, I'll spend 25, 30 minutes on him. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can, if you can't get them to bite and throw it in one direction, move angles, move your boat around and bring it across the bed at a different angle. And even though the bed may be, as big as a hood of your truck, the spot you have to put it in might sometimes only be as big as a silver dollar. The where they actually lay. It's that you want, and it might not be center of the bed. It might be off to the left or the right. But once you get them to bite that one time, when you can get them to bite that first time, then every cast needs to be in that same exact spot to get them to bite again.
Fantastic advice. One of the best answers I've ever gotten in my career of covering the sport actually came from Jason Christie. I asked him, I said, how do you know when to quit on a fish? And he gave me an answer that made me laugh, but kind of made sense to me, although I don't think it was maybe as practical as the answer you just gave. So I said, when do you give up on a fish? And he said, when it gets personal.
So
okay.
let me ask this. You have a fish that's skittish, and you spend 10 minutes on it and you leave. Will you come back to that fish to see if its attitude's changed?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll come back to it, especially if it's a multi-day tournament. I'll come back to it the next day, or if it's a single-day tournament, I might come back if I need it. I might come back 2 or 3 times during the day. And when they're actually doing their spawn, when the male and the female are rubbing and they're back and forth together with each other on the bed, and they're bumping, and she's laying and he's fertilizing, you can't catch them. I can't. You just leave them alone, but you can come back, a few hours later when they're done, and they'll bite first, second cast. But they're hard to catch. I just leave them alone, let them do their business, and go find me another fish.
Uh-huh.
All right, Preston, you got an 11-10 in the Classic. You've caught multiple fish over 8 pounds in major tournaments. You got a bag that weighed 52 and change. What's your personal best individual largemouth?
15 and a half.
Oh,
Jeez.
my God. 15 and a half.
15 and a half.
That's a nice fish.
We can't let you go without telling us about that.
Caught that one off a bed in the Ocklawaha River, which is just below Rodman Reservoir. It was not long after Santee Cooper, and my phone had been ringing off the hook. It had been going crazy, and I said, I just need to get out a day, because it is a fishing business, and I've been trying to work and trying to get everything that I could get out of the records, and I said, I just need a day to go fishing. And I went to where there was no cell phone reception, and I just wanted to be by myself for a little while. And I came across this fish, and I couldn't really see her because it was deep. She was deep, and the water's clear, but it was deep, and it was real shady. And I started pitching up to her, and I knew it was a big fish. I just wasn't sure how big. And finally, I got the buck to hit, and I caught it was about a pound. And I threw back in there, and it's hitting me again. I said, well, there's another buck on the bed. And finally, she picked it up, and I set, and she was so big, and it was the worst fight of any big fish. Never pulled drag, never did anything. Came up to the top of the water, laid on her side, and I pulled her over to the boat. And it was over. That fish that big, I guess she was just exhausted. I'd just been pestering her, but I took a picture of her, and I went and showed her off to a buddy that was fishing not far from me, and we weighed her, and I put her back in the water.
That's awesome.
Yeah, if any 15 wants to hit my bait, I don't care if she fights at all. I just want to catch her, put her on the scales. That's phenomenal, man. 15.
That's a big fish.
You got to go through 100,000 lifetimes of serious bass fishing to get anything approaching something like that.
I've seen 2 in my lifetime that may have been the one. I've seen 2 times. Once I was about 17 or 18 years old. I saw one that was so big it was hard to estimate. And then another time when I was on the Elite Series, I was fishing with my father. My father rode with me, and we were just outside of Stockton, and we had a week off, and there was a little private reservoir, not a private reservoir, it was a state reservoir. You had to pay $20 to get on it, but it was idle only, no.
Stockton, California?
Yeah, just outside of Stockton. It was right off of I-5.
The Delta. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
And there was this little reservoir, and it's maybe 2 miles long and a half a mile wide. It was idle zone only. and I went on there, and I saw one there. And my dad was with me, and I saw her, and I fished for her for 3 days and couldn't get her to bite. She was on one rock. It was on a twig around, and it was perfect. But there was one rock. I'd pull my bait up there, and she'd leave and sit out for 20, 30 feet away and suspend. I'd pull my bait off, and she'd come right back. And we played that game for 3 days.
Terry's from California, so he may have fished that body of water.
Never fished it, but a buddy of mine got an 18 3/4 out of that lake. We're not going to talk about it.
Los Banos.
Los Banos.
Creek.
Yeah, Los Banos Creek Reservoir.
Yep, that's where I was at.
Yep. Yeah, there was a bunch of fish over 17 caught out of there in that 2003 to 2008 time frame, and there probably is still today, but nobody talks about it.
Yep, it was so big that it was hard to judge how big the fish was.
Yeah,
and I don't know how many 6s and 7s. That's where I learned to really fish small line. I never had any confidence in it, and I said, well, I'm out here where they do it, and I'm putting 6-pound test on, and I caught 5-pounder after 5-pounder after, and then after that I had no problem. I had confidence. But it was I had a blast out there. Fished it for 3 days. It was wonderful.
Yep.
Did your time on the trail and in the Elite Series, did it help you become a better angler returning home to Florida?
Yes, and I think some of my best fishing I've ever done in my life was after I quit fishing on the Elite Series. I had 4 or 5 years that it was just unbelievable. I just wasn't fishing any tournaments. I was just going fishing, and I was killing them. But yes, I thought that I knew how to fish until I got on the Elite Series, and there were so many different techniques and new ways to fish, and so many people helped me. Denny Brower helped me about flipping the jig, and we talked in length about it. And Aaron Martin's, I went and got in his boat one day, and we spent 2 hours with him showing me how to rig a drop shot and how to work a shaky head. And we talked, and in return, they wanted to know about bed fishing. So we sat and had some long discussions, and it was really great. All those guys were really helpful, and I was certainly willing to repay them.
Yeah, you're so well liked and respected among your fellow pros. Those kind of bonds, I hope they last a lifetime. Sad that we lost Aaron, of course, but I still know so many people who very fondly remember your time on the trail. And man, you were very successful. But of course, you left. It was shortly before the Elite season gets cranked up that you already had a daughter, but you and your wife had triplets. So now you've got this burgeoning family.
Yeah, and that was always my dream, and I don't want to ruin it for everybody, but fishing just kind of happened for me. I was fishing. I've been fishing my whole life, fishing tournaments with my father, and won a lot of stuff throughout Florida. And when I finally, my wife taught me to try to turn pro, it just kind of happened overnight. And, just one step to the next step to the next step. And all of a sudden there I was. And the next thing I'm in the Classic, I'm catching big fish. And then what I'd always dreamed of was having my family. And I was gone all the time. And, what I wanted was back home. So it was an easy decision to say, okay, you know what? I've proved to myself that I can do it. I want to go back home. I want to be with my kids.
A credit to you as
Hats
a human
off
being, sir. Hats off to you, Preston Clark. That's fantastic. And for the folks who don't know it, Preston's got a fabulous business here in Florida. I don't know exactly how to describe what you do, but you've got a very successful utilities contracting business, Preston, where you work with Polk County and other municipal governments to help people better manage their water resources and so forth.
Yep. Water conservation. That's what we're all talking about. There's more and more people coming to this area of Florida, and there's only so much water to go around, so we have to conserve every drop.
Mm-hmm.
Very true. And I've gotten Preston before we started the program tonight to promise to call me so I can take him out to lunch sometime, because he does occasionally get down to Central Florida where I am. So, Preston, I'm going to hold you to that.
I would love to do it.
That would be my great pleasure, sir. Take you to lunch. I want to make it a regular thing. I don't want it to be a one-time thing. I want to do it a lot. And Terry, I could talk to Preston all night long. I know you
I
could
know.
too. Did you have any more questions? We eventually have to let the man go and let the viewers finally have a break here. But anything else you wanted to talk about?
I think we covered it all. It's awesome to see you, again, Preston, and talk to you and hear the story about your classic big fish, your 52-pound limit, and the 15. So, I mean, you've had a glorious career, and keep on keeping on. Go get another big one.
Much. It was it seems like it was like it happened to somebody else. As I look back on it now, and I go, was that really me? It was.
It was you.
It was really a neat deal. I hope that everybody that tournament fishes could experience what I did those few years. It was awesome.
Yep.
I tell you, man, I think I speak for Terry on this too, because we were both there watching a lot of it, and I had the great privilege of being there at a lot of those events where you showed out, and not only was it you, but you did it with a lot of style, a lot of grace, a lot of modesty and humility, and that's why I hold you in such high regard. That's why all your peers hold you in such high regard. Couldn't happen to a better guy. I'm so happy that you had all those great accomplishments. I'm thrilled that you have such a great life now. Are any of your kids eating up with fishing as you were as a young person?
My two sons are eat up with it probably worse than I was.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Awesome.
They have now that they have Google Earth, they can find all the ponds around town. Their favorite one is behind the sheriff's office in our local town in Palaca, which they go to quite regular. And I figure
you shouldn't have said that, Preston.
They're not going to get in trouble there.
we may have to bleep that out, otherwise they're going to have company.
They bring their buddies back there, and they've learned that lesson too. With, telling their buddies where their secret spots are.
Yeah, that's always a mistake.
Yeah. They're eat up. Well, they fished on the high school team with Palaca, along with Cliff Prince's son and his partner, and we see Hillary Martin, Scott's daughter, just about every tournament. And there's some great fishermen, the Stalvey boys and Jacob Deal. There we get to see them, and they're all great fishermen, and we have a good time. We're getting ready to leave Thursday. If all their homework's done, we're going to Okeechobee for the next tournament.
Nice.
All right, man. Well, hopefully, I'm heading to, as we're recording this, folks, Red Crest is about to start. I'm heading up to Red Crest, but I'll get back in a week, Preston, and hopefully you can holler at me, and I'll take you to lunch wherever you want to go, brother. I'm looking forward to it.
Yep.
And next time I'm in Jacksonville visiting my in-laws, I'll look you up.
Please do, Terry. I'd love to see you.
Yep.
All right, folks, that's Preston Clark, the one and only. I can't think of anybody who spent such a brief time on the trail, just a few years, but who made such an amazing impact on it, especially with regard to big bass, especially with regard to the Bassmaster Classic. Set some records, especially with big fish in the Classic, that I think will outlast me. I think it'll certainly outlast what Ricky Green did in 1976. So, Terry, let's slam the door on this episode of the Big Bass Podcast. But before we go, please remember to subscribe, like, share, give us a comment or a review. It's a small ask, but it's a very big help to us. And please don't forget to check out our website, thebigBassPodcast.com. You'll find our Big Bass Podcast calculator and our listings of record bass, plus supplementary material on the episodes. It's a work in progress, but if you like the show, we think you'll love the website. If you want to reach us, you can get us at our email addresses, ken@thebigBassPodcast.com, Terry@thebigBassPodcast.com, Nathan at thebigBassPodcast.com. My name is Ken Duke, and on behalf of my partners Terry Battisti and Nathan Benson, I want to thank our very special guest Preston Clark, and thank you for joining us. Next week we'll have a new show about a different big bass and a story that you will not and cannot find anywhere else. And remember, size matters.